Can't believe I'm pretending like I'm interviewing this woman. This is a disaster.
I was in a very hazardous part of the pharmaceutical industry because I was working with this thing called AIDS. And one of the things that I got to do was be part of the Human Genome Project. So me and a cast
wow.
So
have you had to move to bigger houses to put all the licenses and certificates on the wall?
They didn't have maternity leave. I was expected to go have a child and be back within 2 weeks. And I was on stage with my baby backpack, pregnant with the third kid.
Did you literally you literally had a crib up on the stage?
And then I had the playpen for my eldest so that he could play with his toys. And people really didn't see me as a professional.
I could talk corn syrup with you for the next hour and a half, no problem. Hi, everybody. This is Dan and Dante. Welcome to another episode of Middle-Aged Mess, the show for people who spent their entire childhood drinking out of the garden hose. Today, I don't even know what we're talking about today. I got to be honest. So I read my guest's profile, and we're going to go off in a bunch of different tangents and get a little freaky today because there's going to be some interesting stories here. Janine Bolon. Hello, Janine. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on today, Dan. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for coming on. I appreciate you as well. Okay. So look, before we even talk about who you are and what you do and what your rap is, let's start with your childhood. I'm going to go right back into it.
Okay, what aspect? My father was in the Navy. So
no, hold on. No, I read on your profile. I grew up impoverished in Missouri. I had all sorts of horrible things happen. I'm going to get a little psychologist on you today. Let's talk about some things that happened in your childhood, like growing up.
Okay. Well, honestly, my father was in the Navy. And I was raised in different countries. When we came to the United States, that is when I got to experience all the joys of Southern Missouri.
Oh, boy. Missouri.
And I was, I was 15 at the time when that happened.
What country were you born in?
I was born in Ojai, California, here in the United States. But
beautiful
spent a whopping 6 months and then before we were transferred.
Okay. So. And where did you go from there? What are some of the countries you lived in as a kid?
We went to Japan, and then we went to a little tiny island called Eleuthera in the Bahamas.
I mean, the Bahamas couldn't have been that bad, Janine. Come on. I mean, that was kind of fun, right?
It was if you were a kid and you didn't mind having your milk shipped to you frozen. Remember, the military was very suspicious of a lot of things going on, and so it wasn't like you could just go down to the local grocery store and purchase food and vegetables from that arena.
Yes, I can imagine. So did you live on the base? You're just strictly on the base?
Oh, no. All families were delayed. We started off base. My dad really tried. But, because of the position that he had as a CB, he kind of kept the base running as an enlisted man. So, the commandant or the commander wanted him on base with his family.
So were there a bunch of other kids there, or was just you and a bunch of corporals?
Oh, no. We had a bunch of kids. It was a large classroom. As far as I was concerned, we had a 3-room school. So you had kindergarten through 3rd grade.
Yeah.
And then you had everybody else. And then the high schoolers were on correspondence courses, and they got the 3rd room of that schoolhouse.
Oh, so you're rocking and rolling there, man. You had 2 rooms. You had the 3rd graders. I mean, it was a party.
It was a party. So, that's kind of how I was raised. That's when we moved to Southern Missouri.
Oh, from Eleuthera to Southern Missouri. Okay.
And it's Missouri, for those of you who are thinking I have an accent, it's Missouri if you are below I-70 and you're close to the Arkansas border like I was. If you're above I-70 or you're in Kansas City or St. Louis, those people say Missouri. So even the state can't decide what is the most appropriate, but legally, it's Missouri.
We're too poor to even pronounce the I.
Yeah.
So did your dad stick around, or did he take off, or what happened?
No, he retired from the military and decided to retire to Southern Missouri.
Okay, so what was so impoverished about that? Doesn't sound terrible to me. Retired military man. You guys probably did okay.
We did okay for a bit until my mother contracted a terminal condition, and we ended up owing about $1 million in medical bills. So that's where things became impoverished.
Oh, wow. What year was that?
I can't remember right now. I'm not used to that question, so I don't have that year specifically, but she did die when I was 21.
Oh, I'm sorry. But that was in like your teenage years.
Pretty much my mom was quite ill during that period of time. Yes.
And I'm sorry to get into this, but I'm
Yeah,
just curious.
that's quite all right.
So doesn't the military provide amazing insurance for all formerly enlisted people, or I guess not?
No, not in this situation.
Oh, wow. Okay. So did you stay in Missouri or did you leave there to go to school or when did you leave the state?
To let you know how quickly we left that particular county, my sister and I had a bet who could get out of there fast enough. She beat me. She was out within 72 hours of graduation. I took 2 weeks to get out after I graduated.
You're like a slowpoke.
I was a slowpoke relative to her. We literally could not pack the car fast enough to get out. Yes.
What was so horrible about Missouri? Like, what was look, I've been to a St. Louis baseball game and I've been to a Kansas City Royals baseball game. And that is my entire history with Missouri.
Yeah. And when you're living down in the Ozarks, close to the southern border, I was not in the Boot Hill, which had quite a rich environment, and you have Cape Girardeau in that area. And please realize we're talking many, many decades ago.
Yeah.
This is back in 1982.
Sure, I recall. Unfortunately, I recall, Janine. I hate to tell you, but I do.
We drank from the garden hose.
Yes,
we did.
Yes. And if you're lucky enough to have a garden hose,
there is that. Yeah. But the aspect of where I was touted generations of people who had been on welfare and were quite proud of the fact that they were fourth generation welfare.
Wow.
And many of the people I spoke with had never left the county, had no understanding why somebody would leave the county. And education was something seen as required by their government, but not necessarily essential to everyday living.
Wow. And so how did that shape you? No, different question. How did you escape that mentality? How did you not get sucked into that?
I was not born and raised there. And I was also a woman who had, by the time I turned 18, I had seen so much of the world that I could see the traps that were laid for women back in 1982 to get stuck in that county and never get out. Yeah. And the primary trap was marriage. So I made sure I did not date, and I made sure I went to college.
Well, by the time you're 18, you're like an old maid. I mean, you should have 4 or 5 kids by then, right?
I was one of the few that did not graduate with a child in arms.
Wow, that's crazy. I mean,
I had a graduating class of 114, and I was one of the 15 women who went to college.
Wow. I mean, 1982 was not that long ago.
For us, no.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. Look, but I guess that's the schism in America, right? You got the two coasts, right?
Yes.
In New York and LA or California. And people kind of think of America as what the land of milk and honey and all the different things that we have. And then you go into the middle of it and it's like a different world.
It is very different. And one of my favorite sayings, I remember I was I was actually in Trenton, New Jersey at the time. And I was on the NJ train headed into New York City. And this woman, and this is around 1995, and this woman, I overhear her speaking, and she's like, "Oh my God, anything west of the Hudson needs to be parking lots." And I remember thinking, oh my God, west of the Hudson, that's a very thin strip of the United
Well, look, I grew up in Los Angeles, and I used to say anything east of Doheny Boulevard just was not civilization anymore. So right. I understand that entirely.
Yeah, you have the desert out there, and that's pretty much only good for solar panels as far as what most people consider.
No, it's true. We need a lot more of them than we have. Okay, so you left Missouri, and you went, where'd you go to school?
University of Missouri at Columbia. That was as far as I could go.
How dare you, Janine? My goodness, get out of the state. Okay.
Well, you could if you had money or you had super awesome scholarships or something like that, but I had not been in a sport. Yeah. So I wasn't athletic, so there was no scholarships for that. Yeah. And I was not in a region of the country where I could use my acumen and my intelligence to get scholarships in that arena. Now, I was able to get a $500 a semester scholarship through a book program.
You were rolling in cash.
But scholarships, you have to remember, were very hard to come by and very difficult to figure out and find when you had to write letters.
When we had paper, when we actually used paper to do things in the world. I remember it very well. It's interesting. My daughter's in Europe right now studying abroad for a semester. And, she's cruising all over with the Eurail and the phone. And I said to her, when I was in Europe, 30 years ago, like we had a piece of paper that said what time the train was showing up at which station, and we had to be there at that time. Like, she didn't even comprehend what I was talking about. Like, she couldn't even imagine that where do you get the piece of paper, Dad? What does that even mean,
Yeah,
But
you had to really prepare in a very different way for travel at that time.
yeah, unfortunately, again, I recall all of these things. It's terrible. Ergo, middle-aged mess. Okay, so you now, and the reason I'm going through all this, Janine, is because, again, I read your profile. I have no idea what you do because it seems like you do 1,000 different things. And so I wanted to get a little understanding of your background and where you came from and how you've kind of metastasized yourself into all of these different areas.
It's quite right, isn't it? Metastasized is probably a very good word.
There you go. I come up with every like twice a podcast. I think of something good to say.
Very good. So what I actually do is multidimensional because I have probably 4 businesses that I'm running at once while also entertaining a part-time job, because I'm one of those people who I just absolutely love assisting other people. And when you're in that kind of servant leadership mode, it lends itself to you being engaged in more than just one project. And I absolutely love it. So I work as a business strategist for one client of mine.
I'm gonna have to write these down. Hold on a sec. Let me make sure.
And then for another client, I work as an outreach specialist, and I'm very good with tech, but I'm also really good at that personalized touch through direct mail. And so some people call me a marketing executive. It just depends on what you need. But I started off, when we go back to Missouri.
Yeah. Yes. I want to go back to Missouri.
I started off as an analytical biochemist who specialized in plant pathology and anatomy. And I was a part of the Food for the 21st Century program because they saw the population explosion that we are now involved in.
Yeah.
And they were working with Missouri and other farmers to be able to handle the food needs, not just of the United States, but of the world, because they saw that we were very good at being able to create food.
Yeah. And look, I love talking about food, not only because I obviously, as you can tell, I eat way too much of it. But no, I'm fascinated by the food supply and what's happened with the explosion of corporate farming and the way the whole food cycle works now, and how horrible it's gotten, and how food is now the prime, creator of disease and illness and stress and inflammation and everything else that we worry about in society today. So, but you were there kind of like back in the 80s when you were doing it, right? It was still okay. Like, there were still a couple of family farms out there where the chickens got to run around in the fields, right? A little bit?
Yes. Oh, yes. And they still are there. You just have to look for them in the cities now.
Yeah. Yeah. So were you there as kind of like this whole ultra processed food world was coming into being?
Well, it started with corn syrup. It started with a lot, and I was in the the academicians. So I was in academia for a lot of this.
Okay.
And so a lot of the money that was being put into it was to study corn and how could you make corn sweeter, and there's all kinds of work that was being done with maize. And the problem with that was the fact that corn is a very greedy plant when it comes to water and nutrients of the soil, which is why I was studying soybeans, which, now there's a whole debate about how awful soybeans are for you, which I disagree with from what the studies I've been able to be a part of. But soybeans were putting nutrients back in the soil and were not as greedy for water. And so if you're out in the Western states, you understand water is the primary factor. Whereas in Missouri, water was in overabundance. And so fungus was the problem.
Yeah.
Yeast was the problem that was killing plants. Yeah.
Got it. And you said it started with corn syrup. Why did it start with corn syrup? What was the qualities of corn syrup?
Corn syrup is in all of our food now because it's a great stabilizer and it's also a great preservative. So you have preservatives in 3 different ways when it comes to food, right? So the first way is you can dehydrate it, get the water out of there. That way, whatever bacteria or yeast or whatever will prevent it from growing. So you can dehydrate it. The other thing is you can do salt. Right? Back in the day, right? You put lots and lots of salt in it. So, like we all know
today.
We all know that.
You mean today? Yes.
And then the third is put sugar in it. it changes the pH and makes it untenable for certain bugs to work. And then we have vacuum processing. We have all these ways of preserving food that we didn't before. And so I know a lot of people talk about our food is the problem, but I also say, well, what food are you eating? If you're eating prepackaged stuff and you're eating stuff that's loaded with corn syrup, yes, you're going to have a lot of challenges.
Yeah, so we could have a whole podcast on this, Janine. I could talk corn syrup with you for the next hour and a half, no problem.
I think enough people have talked about it that it's kind of like cigarettes. We kind of know the demon. We know the bad guy. Well, we know that bad guy originally started as a way of feeding people. Right.
We do know about it, but it's amazing how much we don't know still. I did a podcast with some other guy who was a holistic health guy based out of Europe. And he was talking about the same things. He was talking about sugar and preservatives and the ultra-processed food. And he's like, yeah, you feel like you're doing okay when you're buying oranges and apples from the store, but you don't know all of the pesticides that were in it. When you go to the store, when you go to eat out, what seems to be healthy, that steak that you're eating or that salad you're eating is probably just dripping with polyunsaturated fats. And even when we know, it's amazing how much we still don't know kind of in the lives that we lead today.
It's difficult to figure out where everything comes from. So you get to make choices. And those choices are what helps you feel better, what doesn't help you feel better. And what's interesting to me is a lot of people talk about meditation or what have you. You can actually check in with your body. And like I said, I was an analytical biochemist. So it's the study of the cell, the study of the cell at the molecular level. And that's pretty much what biochemistry is.
Right.
And one of the things that I got to do was be part of the Human Genome Project. So me and a cast of thousands. I mean, there were thousands of scientists working to do that. The intention, now a lot of people have a very dark view of that, but the intention of the scientists like myself that were working in that arena was we were so excited that we could finally discover where the genetic differentiation came from that was causing disease from the genes due to toxicity, environmental factors, and inherited. And so we've solved a lot of problems, but as is typical in science, for every problem you solve, it's a hydra. 10 more present themselves. And so it can feel like we haven't made much progress, but actually we really have.
Well, no, of course we have. And it's interesting you say that some people have a dim view of the Human Genome Project, because I remember when those results started coming out and they finally mapped the entire human genome. What amazing advancement it was, and all the things we could now do because of that. Like, who could possibly have a dim view of that? I mean, it's kind of amazing.
But they do.
Yeah.
But they do.
Yeah.
And it's like when we got ready to turn on CERN, the particle, we were all excited about potentially being able to find the Higgs boson. We were going to create black holes and we were going to blow ourselves up. So, you always have somebody that is very nervous about science because
that's
it can
another
be
podcast.
scary.
That's another podcast, right? About the political and the religious, views of some of these things.
And science has never had an issue with the politics.
No, of course not. Of course not. Science is always left completely alone to just thrive and succeed.
We just thrive on our own merits.
Totally. So why'd you leave that world? I mean, I would think that's a super interesting world to be in, chemistry and science.
Yeah. I had to leave that world in 1996 because the unthinkable happened after 10 years of marriage.
You got pregnant.
I had a flu that wouldn't go away. And then I found out, oh my God, I'm actually pregnant. So
I guessed it. I said you got pregnant. Look at me. I'm like a seer. I'm a psychic.
Yes, you are. And one of the fascinating things was in that regard was the fact that they didn't have maternity leave. I was expected to go have a child and be back within 2 weeks. Okay. That was as much time as I could take. And because I had motherhood under my belt at that point, I was no longer able to work at what I had been designed to work in and what I'd been trained to work in, which I was in a very hazardous part of pharmaceutical. Actually, I wasn't in Missouri at the time, but I was in a very hazardous part of the pharmaceutical industry because I was working with this thing called AIDS. I was working with AIDS. I was working with blood. I was helping automate. We were processing 2,500 to 5,000 samples a week, trying to find solutions to that very horrible problem because our blood banks had been infected with a condition, right?
Right.
So,
Janine, you're
yeah.
so cool.
Thank you, sir. You're very cool yourself.
I don't know what you do these days, but everything that happened pre-1996 was awesome.
And so anyway, I had to step out of that because there wasn't support for women to be mothers and in science. It was a very male-dominated organization. You have to remember, it wasn't until the X-Files when Dr. Scully
yes,
was
Gillian Anderson.
able, in the second season, she was able to wear the pantsuit. You have to remember, it wasn't until then that women were allowed to wear pantsuits as a corporate woman working in the laboratory. Otherwise, we had pantyhose, suits, and heels as we were working in very dangerous environments.
I mean, it's really so amazing how far we've come in just a few generations, you know? I mean, in like the millennials and Gen Z, and now women are, I don't know, 58% of our, college students, and they're, over half of our professional categories. And like my mom, this has nothing to do with anything, but my mom, who's now in her 80s, she went to law school when she was 42 years old. She'd been a teacher for, since she got out of college. And her essay to get into law school was, she was 42 years old and going to law school. And her essay was, when I grew up, women were allowed to be teachers and nurses and moms. And that's it. That was your entire horizon as a woman growing up when my mom did. And we never even thought about the concept of going to law school. Anyway, okay, so now you're a mom, now you've got a kid. Now what decisions are you making that kind of led you to where you are now?
I think the biggest one was our income dropped by 57% because
that's a big one. That's a big one. Yeah.
Because although my husband was a very good breadwinner, let me tell you, at the same time, he was still training in his particular scientific endeavors.
And he was no analytical biochemist, let's be honest. Come on,
he was
Janine,
actually,
you can toot your horn a little bit.
You're so sweet. But to his credit, he was a veterinary pathologist, which requires a great deal of training. And so my income was supporting the training that he was having to go through. So yeah, he was a doctor of veterinary medicine, but it requires an additional 4 years and certification on top of that to be the pathologist side of it.
Oh, wow.
So we were a tag team on that. So when I dropped out of the workforce, that was a big hit. So I read 64 books on personal finance. How do you live on only one income?
What was that, a weekend for you?
Thank you. You're very kind. Yeah. But no, it took me about 18 months to get through all of them. And I decided to start teaching people debt-free living. And a 60-40 principle was something that I came up only for my family. And I would teach people at my kitchen table while I had the kid and blah, blah, blah. And then right behind that child, I don't know, the dam broke or something, but I ended up having 4 children in 7 years.
Oh, wow. Well, you were busy. You were busy.
I was a little busy at that point, and I got into
You didn't sleep during the 90s. I mean, that was it. It was over.
I did not. I did in the 90s and the early 2000s. I think I finally started getting a full night's sleep about 2005.
Yeah, it's all a big blur. Yeah. So, okay, so the 64 personal finance books, it's a very scientific approach, I guess, right?
Well, I am an analytical keyword scientist.
And so what came out of that 64? You became a financial advisor or what? Or it's just...
Well, I couldn't call myself any of those things, remember, because you have to be very, very careful when it comes to money, how you self-identify, because you could get into trouble because it's very highly regulated when you start talking about money. So I called myself, and this is going to sound so trite now, but I called myself a financial first responder. I was a financial coach, and I had to use the term coach. And that was back before, you were a consultant, and consultant meant you were unemployed. Remember those days?
I do.
Right?
I do.
Consultant equals unemployed.
Yeah.
And so I was a financial coach, and I picked that word because I didn't want to be employed. I was coaching people.
Who would want that?
Right.
And now you go to WeWork, and every single person there is a consultant.
Is a consultant. Yeah. And so anyway, so that was kind of how it worked. And I started calling myself a financial first responder, and I started teaching people. And so I would have the crib or the playpen on the stage with me while I gave these talks. And Susie Orman was getting big about then, and David Bach was getting big. It was that era. And I was on stage with my baby backpack, pregnant with the third kid.
Did you literally had a crib up on the stage?
And then I had the playpen for my
Oh my
eldest so
God,
that he
that's
could play with his
awesome.
toys.
That is so cool.
And that became one of the requirements as I was touring around teaching money. It's not just for rich people. I was talking to people about that, but I would say to the event organizer, I need this when I'm on stage. And my kids were fine. They were well behaved. And I just kept talking and presenting. And
Janine, you're the coolest person I know. I got to tell you. I mean, that's like unbelievable. You have the kids on stage with you. Did they ever cry? Was there a story? Did they ever throw up or
no,
grab a boob or anything? Nothing?
No, they were fine as long as they were nearby. If they lost eyesight, though, that's when stuff went south. So that's why I kept them nearby. And of course, that was very weird back in that time.
Totally.
You know?
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, now it's cool. Back then, you were a freak. I'm sure people.
I was an absolute freak, and people really didn't see me as a professional.
But I would think that people. But I think that people would remember you, though, right? Like they probably remembered.
Did.
Right?
They totally did. Yeah, but you have to remember, it's before we had a lot of email marketing and Facebook, and you have to remember, I was doing subscription programs, but I was using freeconferencecall.com, and I was answering questions over the telephone. Remember, so stuff like that.
Oh my God!
Back in that era,
you were like the toddler whisperer. Oh, well, that would have been amazing. Okay, well, you've moved on in like 16 different industries since then. So let's move on from personal finance, first responder, which, by the way, is a very cool name. What happened next? Where did we grow? Where did we evolve into next?
Well, we kept moving around because of my husband's training and everything, and because I was a brat, a military, it was no problem for me to be able to move around. And every 4 or 5 years, we'd have to shift into another culture or dynamic, depending upon what was going on. I was very big in the homeschooling environment. And I decided to go back after 20 years and get my master's in education. Because
why not? Just something to do. I'm sure that was probably like a month of February in like 2002. I'm sure.
You're so sweet. No, we were in a state where they had decided that they were going to try to make homeschooling illegal. So,
which state?
California.
No, come on now. That's not true. How dare you? Is that true?
Yes, it was. The superintendent of schools was after homeschoolers because remember, California was struggling because they were losing federal monies because so many kids were dropping out of the schools due to the toxic mess that you had down in LA with the multi-billion-dollar school that was down there.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I don't want to name
I don't remember that. I don't really remember that, but okay.
1998 through 1998 through 2002. That was the time.
Wow, that's interesting.
And I could paper one of my children's rooms with all the paperwork and all the papers that I received from the superintendent of schools that I was practicing homeschooling illegally. So I went back and got my master's in education so that I had something to tout. And then I started taking classes from attorneys, probably from women like your mom, thank you, Mom, who were teaching us. It has not been defined legally what homeschooling is. Ergo, they cannot tell you are practicing outside the law because the law has never said what homeschooling is. And we want to keep it that way.
Can I ask a question? Because I was in California. I was in California most of my life. I'm in Vegas now. But was it actually illegal? Was it actually, there was a law that said, what was it?
No.
Okay.
No, it was a fear campaign.
Oh, so you thought it might become illegal? Like there was,
and we were fighting that very, very big. So I went back and got my master's, and in the course of getting my master's, that's when I ended up publishing my master's work because people kept saying, "Janine, can we have a copy of your thesis?" Unheard of. Anybody wants to read a thesis.
Yeah.
But because of the way I'd written it and the studies that I was doing, they wanted copies. So I was having to run to Kinko's. So I finally just did this thing. Remember that time where they would call it vanity publishing? You were
don't they still do that? I think they still do that, right?
Yeah. Anyway, I found a vanity publishing group. And I published my thesis because I got tired of photocopying things at Kinko's.
That is so awesome.
And that's where money, it's not just for rich people, was born. So,
have you had to move to bigger houses to put all the licenses and certificates on the wall?
You have to remember, there are no licenses. There are no certificates, my friend.
There's a lot of diplomas, though. There's diplomas everywhere in every room of the house.
Just
kitchen and the dining room.
It's very simple. No, I didn't go by traditional routes. I don't have an I love me wall that would impress anybody.
Mine is pretty good. You can come to my house and check mine out.
Thank you. I'd love to see yours, please.
Okay. So now we're done with the homeschooling fear campaign, and we're moving. We're still a first responder, a financial first responder. And now what's our next step?
Well, we ended up moving to Colorado, and I was a homeschooling liaison for the county, for Boulder County for a period of time. And then my husband and I ended up going to Ohio. And that's when everything kind of changed. I had to step away from a 32-year marriage. And that's when I started my own businesses and that sort of thing. Moved back to Colorado with the 4 kids, and the husband followed me, and we are still on. Well, I don't want to call him my ex because we're still friendly.
I've never heard husband before. That is fantastic. Okay, then we're done. We can't beat that remark. We're finished. Podcast is over. Okay, keep going. Yeah.
So I came back to Colorado because I always loved where I live. And so when I came back, that's when I started cranking out books, and I became an online course creator. This is back in 2015. Okay. And so I found this thing called Zoom. And if you downloaded the app onto your computer, you could actually teach from there. And so that's how I kept kind of body and soul together. Was I started creating online courses. I started teaching people what I knew. And that's when things kind of exploded. So to date, I think I have 95 online courses and 1,035 students who have gone through that program, 17 books. And then I got into podcasting because I always had my hand in radio and podcasting. I was an audio blogger in 2005. And now I have a multimedia company that I just sold last year. And so now I'm on to other things.
Billy, what the hell am I doing? What am I doing wrong? I mean, seriously, I need an online course from Janine. I can't believe I'm pretending like I'm interviewing this woman. This is a disaster.
You said you didn't know what you were going to get into.
I mean, I didn't know you were going to destroy my entire life, though, Janine. I didn't realize you were going to prove to the world what a loser I am. My God, that's amazing. That's awesome. So what's your primary thing these days? Like, what do you consider yourself today?
Today, I am an author who enjoys helping people tell their stories.
I like it. What is it? 18 books? Do I remember that right? 18?
I think I'm only at 17.
Oh, loser. Speaking of losers, my God, up your game.
That was before ChatGPT. I just want to say that.
Right.
Okay.
And it's still only Wednesday, and we still got till the weekend. Hey, so when you sold your media company, how did that process happen? How did they contact you? What was the evolution of selling it?
What was purchased was the systems that I used to run a team of 15 people so that we could run 7 podcasts at the same time. So that's what I sold.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so, and your books what's the primary subject of your books these days? What are you kind of focusing on?
Currently, I'm all about helping authors be able to be profitable. And most people are like, well, I'll just sell more books. And I'm like, your profit margin on a book is $1. So unless you become a J.K. Rowling or John Schwartz or Clive Cussler or something like that, unless you become one of those sorts of people where you're selling millions, it's going to be very difficult for you to make a living with that. So let's talk about other ways that you can leverage the book so that you can become a profitable author.
Got it. And your podcast, do you still have podcasts?
I still have a podcast. It's the Janine Bolon Show, but it's also on 64 public radio stations. And we got syndicated in 2020. That was kind of cool.
Oh, that's awesome. Are you all over the country, all over the world, all over the...
Well, it depends on who you talk to because we're on 112 different internet-based platforms. So I'm sure we are all over the world, but we only talk in English. So that might limit a few things.
Jesus, Janine, I'm exhausted. I'm literally exhausted. And I know, like, if I do this podcast, the interview with you again, like next month, there's going to be 50 new things you're going to be talking about.
Yes, because it'll be the Right Habits series that I'm building out.
Oh, what's that? Let's talk about that real quick.
That's just a book series that are nothing but workbooks where people will be able to go on to Amazon, get the workbook, be able to sign up for the online course, and then be able to get the videos. So it's a multimedia approach to online courses. And I think it'll serve them better than what I've had to do in the past.
Very cool. Yeah. And then who's your prime market? Who are the people who are contacting you right now? What's your sweet spot, as they say?
People who are very nervous about technology and want a helping hand with that and have a message or a story to tell. So, not everybody that is Gen Z or a millennial is comfortable with tech, and they love being able to talk to me because I simplify it down for them and we don't confuse them with a lot of lingo.
Billy, write down Janine's number. We're going to call her after this. Thanks.
I have a link. I'll be glad to give it to you.
I was about to say, Janine, where can people find you?
People can find me on the mother of all websites. And I say that as a joke because it has almost 1,000 pages on it. It's the8gates.com, and we can put it in the show notes for you. We also have one called therighthabit.net, and that's the other one. So.
Well, Janine, I had no idea what was going to happen today. And I got to tell you, this was a lot of fun. You're so cool. I want to have you back because next time I want to actually know who you are. Then we'll kind of dig into some real stuff.
I would like to be able to dig into some real stuff to help people solve whatever problems they're going through in the moment. And so, yes, when I come back on, I would love to be able to talk about something very specific so that we can give them true tools and techniques and systems and routines so that they can accomplish what they want to accomplish rather than just getting it all piecemeal. I would love to be able to do that.
Well, you realize you're going to be teaching me all of that stuff, just so you know. I don't care about them. I care about me. But no, this has been a lot of fun. I thank you so much for your time. It's really a fascinating story. You've done a lot of really amazing things in your life, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Sure. And okay, well, here we go. Another episode of Middle Age Mess done for. Don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to do all those good things. Also, go to my entertainment company, which is like 1% as cool as Janine's, called Planet Red with 2 Ds, planetred.com. And we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.